People think betrayal happens in one big moment. It doesn't. It happens in tiny conversations behind closed doors, in text messages you're never supposed to read, in smiles that disappear the second you leave the room. I learned that at 68 years old, standing across the street from the condo I'd spent 30 years paying for, staring at a bright red sign that read, "For sale." The strange part wasn't the sign. The strange part was that I hadn't hired a realtor. My own son had promised his wife they'd own my home one day. They just forgot one important detail. I was still alive. The first thing you need to understand about me is this. I wasn't rich, at least not in the way people imagine. I wasn't the woman who wore designer clothes or drove a luxury SUV. I had worked 39 years as an elementary school librarian in Sarasota, Florida. Children remembered me because I always knew which books made scared kids smile. Parents remembered me because I stayed late helping struggling readers. The school district remembered me exactly 1 month after retirement when they replaced me. Life moves on. That's what everyone says. But I had one thing nobody could take away: my condo overlooking the Gulf, 2 bedrooms, white balcony, morning sunshine, a little kitchen where every Thanksgiving dinner had started, every Christmas cookie had been baked, every birthday candle had been blown out. My husband Daniel and I bought it when we were 34. Back then, the building wasn't glamorous. The elevator broke every other week. The paint peeled. The parking lot flooded whenever Florida remembered it was hurricane season. But Daniel smiled and said, "One day everyone will want this view." He was right. Over 30 years later, that condo was worth almost 4 times what we paid. But to me, it wasn't money, it was Daniel. After cancer took him 12 years ago, every room still carried pieces of him. His coffee mug, his favorite chair, the tiny scratch in the hallway where he'd dropped our dresser moving it upstairs. People kept telling me to downsize, move closer to family, sell while the market was hot. I always smiled. This is home. Then came my son, Ethan, my only child, the little boy who used to run into my arms after Little League games. The teenager who cried the day his father died, the man I believed would always protect me. He married Claire 7 years ago. Beautiful, confident, perfect hair, perfect smile, perfect manners. At least when strangers were watching. She never yelled, never insulted anyone directly. She specialized in something much more dangerous, tiny cuts. "You're still driving? You live alone? That condo must be difficult to clean. You shouldn't have to manage all this by yourself." Each sentence sounded caring, until you heard enough of them. Then you realized she wasn't worried about me. She was preparing everyone else for the day she'd convince them I couldn't live independently anymore. I ignored it. Families survive misunderstandings. That's what I believed. Then Daniel's birthday arrived. Every year I made his favorite lemon cake, just for me, just to remember. That afternoon, Ethan and Claire came over carrying wine. Claire hugged me longer than usual. "Mom, we have wonderful news." People don't realize how dangerous those words can be. Wonderful news? For whom? They sat at my dining table. Claire kept smiling. Ethan wouldn't meet my eyes. "We're thinking about starting a family." I clapped. I cried. I hugged them. I meant every second of it. Then Claire said something strange. "We've been talking about the future. The future." That word again. She reached across the table and squeezed Ethan's hand. "We've decided we want our children growing up in this neighborhood." I smiled. "It is beautiful here." She looked around my condo, every room, every wall, every window, like she was already measuring furniture. Ethan finally spoke. "You know, eventually." He hesitated. Claire finished the sentence. "This condo will stay in the family." Something inside me shifted just slightly, like hearing a floorboard creak in an empty house. I laughed. Hopefully that's many years away. Claire laughed too, but hers sounded different. "Oh, of course." Then she glanced at Ethan, a look so quick she probably thought I missed it. I didn't. Weeks passed. Life returned to normal. Until one Sunday afternoon. I arrived early for brunch at Ethan's house. The front door was unlocked. I stepped inside carrying blueberry muffins. Then I heard voices. "Claire." once Margaret finally moves into assisted living? Silence, Ethan answered quietly. I don't know if she'll agree. Claire laughed. She won't have a choice forever. I froze. Every muscle stopped moving. My heart became louder than their conversation. Claire continued. The condo solves everything. We sell ours, move into hers. No mortgage, no daycare worries, no financial pressure. Ethan still sounded uncertain. It feels wrong. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. She doesn't need 2 bedrooms. I looked down at the muffins in my hands, still warm, still wrapped. I quietly backed out the front door. Neither of them ever knew I'd been there. On the drive home, I didn't cry, not yet, because denial is louder than heartbreak. I convinced myself I'd misunderstood. People say foolish things. Couples dream out loud. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe Ethan would never allow it. Then came the realtor's sign. I was driving home from grocery shopping when traffic slowed near my building. At first, I thought it was landscaping. Workers. Maintenance. Then I saw it. A polished sign, white post, red letters, for sale, standing on the lawn in front of my building. My building. I parked so quickly, the groceries rolled across the back seat. I walked toward the entrance. The realtor stood talking with another resident. I interrupted politely. Excuse me. She smiled. Can I help you? Why is there a for sale sign outside? Oh, she checked her folder. We're listing Unit 8B. My stomach dropped. 8B. My condo. I stared at her. I own 8B. She blinked. I'm sorry? I never listed it. The smile disappeared from her face. What? At that exact moment, the elevator doors opened, and my son walked out of the lobby, holding a folder, the exact same folder the realtor was carrying. Ethan froze so completely that the folder in his hand slipped a few inches before he caught it against his chest. For one long second, nobody moved. The Florida breeze rustled the palm trees lining the parking lot, and somewhere behind me a gull cried over the gulf, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. The realtor looked from me to Ethan, confused. You two know each other? She asked with an awkward smile. Ethan forced a laugh that sounded like it hurt. Mom, what are you doing here? I held up my grocery bag. I live here, remember? My voice stayed calm, almost frighteningly calm. A better question is, what are you doing here? Claire stepped out of the building a second later, carrying a leather portfolio and her phone. The confidence on her face disappeared the instant she saw me standing beside the realtor. She recovered quickly, plastering on the same polished smile she'd worn for years. Margaret, what a surprise! I looked directly into her eyes. Is it? Nobody spoke. Finally, the realtor cleared her throat. I'm sorry. There seems to be some misunderstanding. Mr. Walker contacted my office about listing Unit 8B. I slowly turned toward my son. Did you? Ethan's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Claire answered instead. It's simply a consultation. That's all. We were exploring future options. I nodded thoughtfully as if I believed her. Future options? For my home? She smiled again, thinner this time. Families plan ahead. I looked at Ethan instead of her. Did you tell this woman you own my condo? His face drained of color. Mom, it's not like that. Then tell me what it's like. He glanced desperately toward Claire, silently asking her to rescue him. She stepped forward. Margaret, you're making this bigger than it is. I laughed quietly. Am I? Then I faced the realtor. I'd like to save you some trouble. I am the only owner of Unit 8B. Nobody has my permission to sell it, discuss selling it, or promise it to anyone. The realtor looked horrified. I sincerely apologize. I was informed that the family was preparing an estate transition. Estate transition. Such polite words for waiting on someone to die. I thanked the realtor for her honesty, picked up my grocery bags, and walked into the building without another word. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I didn't cry. That terrified them more than any scene ever could. As the elevator doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Claire whispering furiously to Ethan while he stared helplessly at the ground. They expected an explosion. Instead, I gave them silence. Silence makes guilty people tell on themselves. That night, my phone rang 3 times. Ethan. I ignored every call. Claire texted, "We're sorry this looked bad. Can we explain?" I didn't answer. An hour later, another message arrived from Ethan alone. Mom, please, It's not what you think. I stared at the screen for several minutes before placing the phone face down. Daniel used to tell me that when people panic, they stop protecting the truth and start protecting themselves. I finally understood what he meant. The following morning, I drove somewhere I hadn't visited in almost 8 years. It wasn't a bank. It wasn't a lawyer's office. It was a small brick building with a brass sign that read, Harold Benson, Attorney at Law. Harold had handled Daniel's estate after he passed away. He greeted me with tired eyes and a warm smile. "Margaret, it's been too long." I smiled back. "I'm afraid I need your help." 2 hours later, every document connected to my condo lay spread across his conference table. Harold adjusted his glasses, studying each page carefully. Then he looked up. "Has anyone asked you to sign anything recently?" I thought for a moment. Claire insisted I sign what she called updated emergency paperwork after my hospital visit last winter. I refused because I wanted time to read it. Harold's eyebrows rose. "Do you still have those papers?" I nodded. "In a drawer at home. Bring them to me immediately." That afternoon, I found the envelope exactly where I'd left it. At first glance, the paperwork looked harmless. Medical contacts, emergency information. But tucked beneath those pages was something I hadn't noticed before, a limited power of attorney prepared but never signed. Harold's expression darkened as he read it. "Margaret, if you had signed this without reading it carefully, Ethan would have had authority over significant financial decisions involving your property." I felt cold despite the Florida heat. "Including selling my condo?" He nodded slowly. "Potentially, yes." For the first time since Daniel died, I felt physically sick. This hadn't been a misunderstanding. This had been a plan. Harold leaned back in his chair. "I'm going to ask you something difficult. Do you want revenge or do you want protection?" I thought about Claire's smile, Ethan's silence, the realtor standing in front of my home believing I was already halfway gone. I answered honestly, "Both." Harold smiled for the first time that day. "Good. Because the law allows us to do something very interesting." He opened another folder from my file, one Daniel and I had signed years before without giving it much thought. I stared at the yellowing pages. Harold tapped one paragraph with his pen. "Your condo isn't just yours. Legally, it is protected by a living trust that becomes irrevocable under certain conditions you established after Daniel's death." I blinked. I barely remember signing this. Most people don't. But here's the important part. He slid the document across the table. "If you ever determine that an intended heir attempts to manipulate or pressure you regarding the property before your death, that heir may legally be removed as a beneficiary at your sole discretion." I looked at him in disbelief. "You mean?" Harold nodded. "Yes, Ethan's inheritance exists because you choose it to exist. It is not guaranteed." For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not because I wanted to hurt my son, because I finally realized they had underestimated the one thing 39 years as a librarian had taught me. Never make decisions before you've read the entire story, and theirs was only halfway written. Margaret smiled all the way home, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had won. It was the smile of someone who had finally stopped being afraid. For weeks, she'd been reacting to Ethan and Claire's moves, always one step behind, always wondering what they were planning next. That ended the moment Harold slid the trust agreement across the table. They believed they were waiting for an old woman to make a mistake. They had no idea she had just become the one writing the ending. She pulled into the condo parking lot just before sunset. The Gulf shimmered gold beyond the balcony, exactly the way it had on the evening Daniel proposed to her. She stood outside for a long moment staring at the building. "You always said people show you who they are when money gets involved," she whispered toward the ocean. "I guess you were right again." Her phone buzzed. "Then calling." This time, she answered. "Mom," his voice cracked. "I've been worried." "No," she replied calmly. "You've been worried about the condo." Silence. "I deserve that." "You deserve honesty." "I know. So start." Another long silence followed. Finally, Ethan sighed. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this." Margaret leaned against her kitchen counter. "What exactly wasn't supposed to happen?" "You seeing the realtor." "So, there was a realtor." "Mom." There was a realtor. Yes. Did you tell her the condo would be yours? Ethan. Yes. Those 2 letters hurt more than shouting ever could. She closed her eyes. Not because she was crying, because she was remembering. The little boy who once cried when he accidentally stepped on a butterfly. The teenager who worked every summer to help pay his college tuition because he refused to let his parents carry the burden alone. When had that boy disappeared? Or had he simply grown into the man standing on the other end of the phone? I never raised you to wait for someone to die. I'm not, his voice exploded. I'm not waiting for you to die. Then why were you selling my home? I wasn't selling it. The realtor disagrees. It was just, he couldn't finish. Because there wasn't a version of the truth that sounded good out loud, Margaret spoke softly. Claire told you this was a good idea. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. She already knew. After ending the call, Margaret did something unexpected. She invited them to dinner. Friday, 6 o'clock. Claire responded within 2 minutes. We'd love to. Of course they would. They thought she was ready to forgive. Instead, Margaret spent the next 4 days preparing. Not emotionally, legally. Harold introduced her to a forensic accountant named Susan, who specialized in elder financial abuse. Susan spent hours reviewing bank statements, emails, and public records. On Thursday afternoon, Susan called. Margaret, you should sit down. Margaret's stomach tightened. What is it? I searched public mortgage applications, and 3 months ago. Susan paused. Ethan and Claire applied for financing on a larger house. Margaret frowned. I thought they couldn't afford one. They couldn't. Then why apply? Susan's voice became very quiet because on the application, they listed your condo as their expected future asset. Margaret felt the room spin. What? They estimated the condo's future value at $1.8 million. They even included projected equity after selling it. Margaret couldn't speak. Susan continued. They weren't hoping to inherit it someday. They were already spending the money. Margaret slowly lowered herself into a chair. Daniel had spent 40 years paying off that mortgage, working overtime, skipping vacations, repairing broken appliances himself because hiring contractors cost too much. Every sacrifice, reduced to a number, on someone else's loan application. Susan wasn't finished. I found something else. What? They've already hired an interior designer. Margaret laughed, not because it was funny, because sometimes pain becomes so overwhelming that laughter is the only sound left. What room? Susan hesitated. The designer's notes mention removing your reading room. Margaret looked toward the small bedroom, flounce-sailing bookshelves, Daniel's leather chair, thousands of children's books she'd collected over 4 decades. It wasn't a spare room, it was her life. Susan continued reading. Convert library into nursery. Margaret quietly thanked her and hung up. Then she walked into the reading room. She ran her fingers across the shelves. Each book held a memory. Every scratch on the wooden floor reminded her of moving boxes with Daniel. Every photograph carried another chapter of their marriage. Someone had already decided to erase it, without asking, without waiting, without even telling her. Friday evening arrived. At exactly 6 o'clock, Ethan and Claire knocked. Claire entered carrying flowers, expensive flowers, the kind guilty people buy when words won't be enough. You look wonderful, Claire smiled. Margaret accepted the bouquet. Thank you. She placed it directly into the kitchen sink. Without water, Claire noticed. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. Everyone pretended nothing had happened. Ethan barely touched his food. Claire filled every silence with forced conversation. Finally, dessert arrived. Daniel's favorite lemon cake. The same recipe she'd made every birthday. Margaret cut 3 slices, then stood. I have something I'd like to say. Both of them looked relieved. They thought this was forgiveness. I've spent the last week thinking about family. Claire smiled. So have we. Margaret ignored her. When Daniel and I bought this condo, we were so broke we celebrated by sharing 1 cheeseburger. Ethan smiled weakly. I remember that story. I told it because it reminded you that homes aren't built with money. They're built with sacrifice. She walked toward the bookshelf, removed an old photo album. Inside were pictures of Ethan as a child, building sand castles, learning to ride a bicycle, opening Christmas presents. Then she placed another document beside the album, a mortgage application. Claire immediately recognized it. The color drained from her face. Ethan stared. "Mom." Margaret looked directly at him. "Would you like to explain why your loan application listed my condo as your financial asset?" Nobody answered. She placed down another sheet, the interior designer's proposal, highlighted in yellow. "Convert existing library into nursery." Claire's breathing became shallow. "Where did you get that?" Margaret smiled. "The better question is why it exists." Ethan turned toward his wife. "You told me you never sent that," Claire whispered. You said we were only getting ideas. You lied to me?" Margaret watched silently for the first time. They weren't united. Claire grabbed Ethan's arm. "Don't do this here." He pulled away. "No, you've been telling me everything would work out. You said Mom would eventually agree. You promised," Claire snapped. "Because old people always downsize." The words echoed through the condo. Silence followed. Claire realized what she'd said, too late. Margaret simply nodded. "There it is. The truth." Claire tried to recover. "I didn't mean..." "No, you finally did." Ethan stared at his wife as though seeing her for the first time. Margaret reached into a folder Harold had prepared. "I have one last document." She slid it across the table. Ethan looked down. His hands began shaking. It wasn't a deed. It wasn't a will. It was a legal notice. Notice of removal as beneficiary. His eyes widened. "Mom, I learned something this week. My trust gives me the right to protect myself from anyone attempting to manipulate my property." Claire whispered. "No," Margaret continued calmly. "Effect immediately, you are no longer the beneficiary of this condo." Ethan looked as though someone had knocked the air from his lungs. "You disinherited me. I protected myself." "Mom, please. You thought I was already gone. You planned my future without inviting me into it. You hired a realtor. You applied for loans. You redesigned my home. You erased me before I had even left." Tears rolled down Ethan's face. For the first time all evening, they looked real. And Margaret realized something heartbreaking. The revenge she had imagined would feel satisfying didn't. Because no legal document could give her back the son she thought she had. She looked at the boy in the photographs. Then at the man sitting across from her. Only one of them still existed. And he had chosen money over family. She quietly walked to the front door, opened it. "I hope one day you understand. I didn't lose my son today. I lost him the day he believed my home belonged to him instead of the woman who built it." Without another word, she waited, and one by one, they walked out of the condo that had never been theirs. The condo was silent again. For the first time in months, it felt like mine. I stood on the balcony as the sun disappeared beneath the gulf, the same view Daniel and I had fallen in love with nearly 40 years earlier. The evening breeze carried the scent of salt water, and somewhere below, children laughed by the beach. Life was moving forward. A week later, Harold called. "The paperwork is complete." I thanked him and hung up. I never called Ethan. I never called Claire. Some wounds don't heal through another conversation. They heal through distance. Days turned into weeks. Then one afternoon, my phone rang. "It was Ethan, this time," I answered. His voice was barely recognizable. I left Claire. I closed my eyes but said nothing. She admitted everything. Another pause. The realtor, the mortgage application, the designer. She'd been pushing me for years. I kept telling myself it was practical. I convinced myself we were planning for the future. But somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my mother. I started seeing you as an inheritance. His voice broke. And that's the worst sentence I've ever said. For the first time since all of this began, I cried. Not because of what he had done, because he finally understood what he had become. "I'm sorry, Mom. I know those words can't fix this. They can't, but I needed you to hear them anyway." I looked toward Daniel's old chair. He always believed people deserved one chance to become better than their worst mistake. "I forgive you, Ethan." The silence on the other end became sobs. But forgiveness isn't the same as restoring what was lost. I know. And trust must be earned. I'll spend the rest of my life trying. After we hung up, I walked into my library. I ran my hand across every bookshelf Claire had planned to tear down. Instead of turning that room into a nursery, I transformed it into something neither she nor Ethan had ever imagined. 6 months later, children filled the room every Saturday morning. The condo became home to a free neighborhood reading program. Kids whose parents couldn't afford tutors sat on colorful rugs while retired teachers volunteered beside me. Every laugh echoed through the same walls that had once heard whispered plans to erase me. One afternoon, a little girl looked around the room and asked, "Mrs. Walker, is this your library?" I smiled. "No, it's ours." The room Daniel and I built together would never become someone's investment. It became a place where children discovered stories, courage, kindness, and hope. A year later, the local newspaper featured our reading program. Donations poured in, volunteers doubled, the waiting list grew longer every month. Then came the biggest surprise of all. The city council honored the program with a Community Legacy Award. As I walked onto the stage, the audience stood, hundreds of strangers applauded. In the back row, I noticed Ethan. He hadn't told me he was coming. He stood alone. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't asking for the condo. He was simply clapping harder than anyone else in the room. After the ceremony, he approached carefully. "I don't expect anything. I just wanted to tell you. Dad would be proud." I smiled through tears. I think he finally is. That evening, I returned home and opened the trust one last time. I signed a new amendment. When I die, the condo will not go to any single person. It will be sold. Every dollar will establish the Daniel and Margaret Walker Children's Literacy Foundation, providing books, scholarships, and reading programs for children across Florida. No one would inherit my home. Thousands of children would inherit opportunities instead. A month later, Harold mailed copies of the finalized documents to everyone involved. Claire received one too. There was no argument, no lawsuit, no angry phone call. Just the undeniable truth that greed had cost her everything. Years later, whenever people asked if I regretted changing my will, I always gave the same answer. My son thought he was waiting to inherit a condo. He never realized the greatest inheritance I could leave him was the lesson that love can never be measured in square feet. Money builds houses, character builds homes. And the day my son confused the two, he lost both. As for me, I never lost my home. I simply remembered that the strongest foundation isn't made of concrete. It's made of self-respect. And once you refuse to sell that, no one can ever put a price on your life again.